Hi, seventh graders. Today we are going to focus on adding integers. So, quick review that integers are going to be whole numbers and their opposites. So when you think of whole numbers, you should be thinking of like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then now we're including those opposites, so -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, and so on down the negative number line as well. Things that are not included in the integer category are fractions and decimals. So just those whole numbers and their opposites. So we're going to start by looking at some big ideas, and one of these big ideas is actually going to have a mistake in it, and we'll go ahead and fix that as well. So big ideas, it says a number and its opposite, and then in parentheses, notice it says additive inverse. So that's just another way to say opposite. So a number and its opposite have a sum of 0, forming a 0 pair. Okay, so an example of that would be 8 plus -8. All right, so a number and its opposite have a sum of 0. So we're deciding if that's true or not, okay? In this case, that is. So that's true, that checks out. And again, we can call then -8 is the additive inverse of 8. And another key vocabulary term there is this 0 pair. So when we think of 8 and -8, those form a 0 pair. When adding two integers with the same signs, add their absolute values and keep the common sign. So an example of this type of problem would be maybe something like -2 plus -3, or +2 plus +3. So same signs means we're dealing with like two negatives or two positives. So it says add their absolute values and keep the common sign. So if we think about what -2 plus -3 is going to be, you're going to get -5. All right, if you think about +2 plus +3, you would get +5. So in both of these examples, we're adding the 2 and 3 together because those are the absolute values, and then keeping that common sign. So this is also true. Then this next one says when adding two integers with different signs, subtract the absolute values and keep the sign of the number with the lower absolute value. So if we think of an example of this one, let's say 8 plus -3. Okay, I have different signs here. And so +8 plus -3 is going to end up being +5. And so if we look, it's kind of like we subtracted the 8 and the 3 to get 5. And then we knew that it was going to be +5 because we actually are going to keep the sign of that higher absolute value. So our mistake here is this should say higher absolute value, not lower absolute value. So another example of that would be like -8 plus 3. Now I'm still going to end up subtracting 8 and 3 to get 5, but now my answer will be negative because I have more negatives than I do positive. Okay, that -8 has a higher absolute value than the 3. All right, I have some examples, and both of these examples have mistakes in them as well. So we're going to talk about what those mistakes are and how to fix them. So we have -22 plus 40 is equal to -18. So if I look, I have different signs. I have the -22 and a +40. And so if we look up here, different signs, we're actually going to end up subtracting those absolute values and keep the sign of the number with the higher absolute value. So I'm going to end up subtracting 40 and 22, and that will give me 18. But because the 40 has the higher absolute value, this ends up being +18. So this should be a +18 because 40 has a higher absolute value. All right, and -12 plus -13 is equal to 25. So our mistake here, if I have 12 negatives and I add 13 more negatives, I'm going to end up with even more negatives. So I'm going to end up at -25. And so when we have two negatives, we add their absolute values and keep the sign. All right, on this example, it says choose an integer to be added with -3, solve the problem, then write what you did to solve. We're gonna not choose 0 because that would be too easy. So if I did something like -3 plus 16, what the whole point of this part is I want you to kind of word things in what makes the most sense to you, okay? So if the way I look at this problem, -3 plus 16, that's going to give me positive 13. So I see that they have different signs. That's one thing that I notice. And again, when I say different signs, that means one is positive and one is negative. And so then I ended up subtracting, I guess this is number 2, subtract 16 minus 3, and then keep the sign of the higher absolute value. Now, these might be steps that make sense to me, but if they don't make sense to you, that doesn't do a whole lot of good. So I want you to come up with an example that makes sense, that you can explain, that makes sense to you. And then just to kind of show you another example, if you think of a number line, all right? So if I'm at -3, if I'm adding 16 positives, that means I'm coming 16 to the right. So it takes me 3 to get back to 0, and then I'm going to take 13 more to get to 13. All right, so then I have a couple of mild, medium, and spicy problems to try out. So -5 plus 8. So if we think of these 5 negatives, are going to zero out 5 of those positives, and so I'll be left with 3 positives. And again, there's a variety of ways that you can look at these problems. I'm just kind of going through them quickly. I'm always willing to help you before or after school if you need a little more assistance. -2 plus -4. So when I see this problem, I notice that I have 2 negatives, so I'm going to be combining. I'm going to end up more negative. So I'm actually going to add those absolute values. I'm going to add the 2 and 4 together to get 6, and then I'm going to end up with more negatives, so I'm going to end up at -6. If you think of that on a number line, so here's 0. So if I was at -2 plus -4, then I'm going to come 4 more this way to end up at -6. All right, here it says the table shows the results of 3 plays in a football game. What is the total yards gained or lost for the 3 plays? So the first play, I gained 8 yards. Second play lost 12 yards. And then the third play, I gained 3 more yards. So from the first to the second play, I had the gain of 8 yards, but the loss of 12 yards. So I would be sitting at, it's like 8 plus -12 would be -4. So I'd still be at a loss of 4 yards. And then on that third play, if I gain another 3 yards, now I'm still at a loss of 1 yard. And spicy, the temperature is 12 degrees Fahrenheit at 8 p.m. At midnight, the temperature is -3. What integer represents the change in temperature? So I'm focusing on that change. So I know I started at 12 and I ended up at -3. Okay, and so that change here is the number that goes here. And so this would mean that I would have a drop of 15 degrees to get down to that -3 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so the change in temperature is -15 degrees. All right, I hope that helps a little. Have a wonderful day.